Now we're on Daf Pei Chesamid Beis. Hugu l'neser v'ayil. If the soilage reached the level that you could only cleanse, and remove the soilage of the Big Kuna through these very strong detergents called Neser and Ahal, is afamayim b'chamsa. Just put away the Big Kahuna. We're going to see that Big Kahuna, after they're soiled, are disqualified as Big Kahuna, but we'll take it apart. We'll unravel, the strings, and we'll use them as wicks for the Hadlokas Neros in the Beis HaMikdash. But all this applies if it reached the level of soilage in which water alone, without a detergent, would not be enough to cleanse the beggar. I mean, the Mefarshim have a lot of problems with this because the Kohanim ran around the Azara and there was dam flying in all directions. How could it be possible that there wasn't a soilage that was created by the dam? And then that would mean on a daily basis you got to get rid of Big Day Kahuna. Big Day Kahuna are very expensive, very hard to make. So they say, well, maybe it was slightly soiled by the dam that was flying, but it wasn't really, through and through. Yesh Omrim, according to others, Ein Mechapsen Osom Kol Ikar. According to this very extreme opinion, even if you have a soilage that could be cleaned by water alone, we don't use these begodim. And it would sound like that, according to the Yesh Omrim, again at face value, every day you'd have to put away the Big Day Kahuna and replace them. I don't know. But here the Gemara formulates a principle, which is a very important principle in Beis HaMikdash, and that is Ein Aniyus B'Makom HaShivas. So the avodah of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis HaMikdash itself, requires a certain majesty, and that's called Ashirus. Ashirus means opulence. This is a fancy place. This is not cheapo stuff. That we do out of poverty. Tana Rabbanu, we learned to the Brisa Me'il. Now the Me'il, as we said before, is one of those begodim that is worn by the Kohen Gadol. Right? He has Shmona begodim, and one is called a Me'il. There's a gigantic machlokus exactly how the Me'il looked. I mean, there are many, many different shitos about how the Me'il actually looked. Let's see if he mentions it here. Maybe we'll get to it later on. Oh, he says here, based on the Gemara at the end of Yoma, that the Me'il was a long garment that reached from the Kohen Gadol's shoulders all the way to the ground. The Kohen Gadol wore it on top of his ksones, his tunic, and his belt, his gartel. And the Torah refers to the Me'il of the ephod. According to Rashi and Chumash, the Me'il is very similar to the ketones. It was a full-length robe that was closed all around the body and had sleeves. The Ramban, on the other hand, holds that it was a sleeveless cape that was woven around the neck, slit open in the front from below the neck till the ground. The Rambam holds that, like the Ramban, it was sleeveless, but it had two slits from below the neck to the ground. In any event, what was used to make the Me'il? It was tcheles, purely turquoise wool. Shenemar, as it says, Vayas es Me'il ha'ephod klil tcheles. Klil means entirely of turquoise wool. And it's a pasuk at the end of Shmos. The Me'il was woven of threads consisting of 12 strands, each of turquoise wool. It was a long garment, as we said before. Shulav Ketzad. Now, on the hems On the bottom of the me'il, there were pomegranates, rimonim, and there were also zogim, or bells. And the Kohen Gadol, it's famous that he would walk and they would hear the bells ringing. These bells were attached to the pomegranates on the hem of his me'il. Ketzad, Mevi Tchelis Vargom Salah Shani Shizurim, right? He brings threads that are turquoise, purple, scarlet, twisted together. Osel Son Kiminri Monim. He makes from these different substances things that look like pomegranates. Shalopischu PM, right? If you leave a pomegranate, this I know from my garden in Harnof, if you leave it too long, it opens up. The pomegranates open up. But we're talking about a closed pomegranate. Ukemin konaos shel klosos shebarashe tinok. Apparently, when the children used to fight with, play fight with each other, they would have helmets, and on top of the helmets, they wore some sort of cone-shaped thing, and we're using that to describe the appearance of the pomegranates. Umevi shivim ushnayim zogim. This is the Tanakama's opinion. There were 72 bells. Shebahem shivim ushnayim in bavin. Right, each bell had a clapper, that thing inside a bell. So there were 72 of them. V'tola bahem, and he was hanging these bells with their clappers inside of them, and they were attached to the hems of the me'il of the Kohen Gadol. Now here there's another machlokes as to whether or not these bells were inside the pomegranates, because the pomegranates were hollow, and according to the Ramban, each hollow pomegranate contained a golden bell with a clapper. However, Rashi has a version according to which the golden bells hung from the me'il itself. So there was a pomegranate, and then there was a zag, and then another pomegranate, another zag. So each bell was surrounded, so to speak, by two pomegranates on the right and the left. Shloshim v'shisha b'tzad echad, u'shloshim v'shisha b'tzad zeh. So there were 36 here and 36 there, totaling 72. However, the Brisa quotes a dissenting view of Rabbi Dosa, Omer Mishum Rabbi Yehuda, Shloshim v'shisha hoyu. The total number of bells on the hems of the me'il of the Kohen Gadol were 36. Shmon Esrei mitzad zeh, Shmon Esrei mitzad zeh, 18 on this side, 18 on the other side. Now we're going to soon see that these bells correspond, believe it or not, to the various appearances of tzaras. And the common denominator between the bells and the tzaras, we're going to learn soon that the bells are mechaper for lashon hara, and tzaras is a punishment for lashon hara. So therefore, Amar Ravi'ini bar Sasson, kemachlokas kan, the same machlokas as to whether or not there's 72 bells or only 36 bells, that machlokas applies kachlokas b'maros negoim. How many different appearances are there of tzaras? Tisnan, we learned in the Mishnah, Maros Negoim, Rabbi Dosa ben Hukas Omer Lamed Vav. He holds that there are 36 different kinds of appearances of tzaras. That corresponds to his opinion that there are 36 bells on the hems of the me'il. And Akavya ben Mahal Omer Shivim Ushnayim. But according to Akavya, there are 72 different appearances of tzaras, paralleling the 72 bells, according to the opinion of Tanakama, that were attached to the hems of the me'il of the Kohen Gadol. The Amar Rav Inon in Bar Soson, the same Rav Inon in Yoni Bar Soson says the following: Loman Ismicha Parshas Korbanos, the Parshas Big Day Kahuna. we have what's called Smichus HaParshios, in which the Parsha of the Karbonos, a whole bunch of Karbonos in Parshas Tzav. The Mincha is in Parshas Tzav, the Chatos and the Osham, the Shlomim. All this is it precedes or is followed by a section describing the clothing that was worn the Big Day Kuna by Aaron Ubanov. So what's the connection here between the Karbonos and the Big Day Kahuna? Lo melcha to teach you ma Karbonos mechaprim, af Big Day Kahuna mechaprim. That just like the carbon has a power of kapara, so too the Big Day Kahuna on mechaprim have the power of kapara. Now we're going to go through each one of the Big Day Kahuna and identify which sin is atoned by that beged. For example, ketones, right? We call it a tunic. Mechaperes al shvichas dam. Now, this doesn't mean that the murderer will achieve kapara simply because the Kohen Gadol is wearing a ketones, but it means that the community at large is responsible for harboring a murderer. And the communal sin regarding a murderer is atoned for by the ketones worn by the Kohen Gadol. Now, what's the connection between the ketones and murder? And the answer is from this week's parsha. Because the pasuk says, "Vayishchatu seir izim v'yitbeluas ketones madam." So the brothers, to cover up, why is Yosef not showing up? They're going to claim that he was eaten by an animal, and they're going to take his ketones, the famous ksonas hapasim, the tunic of Yosef, and dip it into the blood of a male goat that was shechted. By the way, this is not for us now, but the fact that the brothers shechted the seir in which they ate the meat, but first they shechted it. This is mida keneged mida against Yosef, because Yosef brought lashon hara to Yaakov that the brothers were eating Avram and Achai, meaning they were not even slaughtering the animal that they were eating. Next, Michnasayim, right? These are the pants. Mechaperes al gili arayas. Shenemar, how do we see this? V'asei lohem michnasei bad lechasos psar ha'erva. Mitznefes, right? This is the turban, one on the head. Mechaperes al gasei ruach. It's apparent now that there's an avera of midos called gas ruach. That's an arrogant person who's full of himself. And, this kind of a top hat, is symbolic of someone whose head is swelled, and he's arrogant. He thinks he's God's gift to the world. Minayin, Omer Rav Chanina, Yovo Dover Shebegova Vichapar Lagova, right? The mitznefes is worn on the head, high up on the head. And that the high up is indicative of an arrogant person. He translates it as haughtiness. Avneit, right? That's the gartel, is mechapral hirur lev. And why is there a connection between the avneit and hirur halev? Hirur halev means when he starts thinking chas shalom that there's no God. Is heicha de isa. That's obvious because where does he wear the belt? It's right near his heart, in the middle of his body, and that's where he's guilty of hirur halev. Choshen. Now, until now, I think we were. Well, just one second. Yeah, we were dealing with the 4 begadim of a Kohen Hedjot. That's Mechnasayim, Ketones, Avneit, and Migbas. And now we're going to talk about the Choshen. The Choshen was worn by the Kohen Gadol. In English, it's called a breastplate. And we'll get to the ephod in a minute. So the choshen is mechapel adinim. A choshen is a word that indicates justice. Like, for example, one of the four chalokim in Shulchan Aruch is called the choshen mishpat, and deals with laws of bein onoli chavero in justice. Shemar v'asisa choshen mishpat. And where's that pasuk? It's in Shmos. Now, we're going to get to the ephod. What is the ephod? The ephod is an apron-like garment worn on the back of the Kohen Gadol, wrapped around his hips, reaching from below the rib cage to the ground. The tzitz is the head plate. Okay, that we know. Oh, he points out that the mitznefes, which is worn on the head, fosters yiras haromus, reverence for God. Haughtiness, on the other hand, goes hand in hand with the decreased reverence for God. And therefore, it stands to reason that the Kohen's donning of the mitznefes, the turban, atones for the sin of haughtiness. And here Olev refers to heretic thoughts, right, heresy, which are tantamount to the actual commission of a sin. He quotes the Gemara in Kedushin for that. Yeah, but what are you going to say about haughtiness? Is that a sin? Ephod is mechaper al avodas kol chavim. And why is that? How do we know that? Ein ephod utrofim. It's a pasuk in Hosea. Trofim are certain types of idols that we learned in last week's parsha. And the pasuk indicates that when there is no ephod, then the sin of trofim meaning idolatry, is manifest. When the ephod is worn, the sin of trofim is expiated. Me'il mechaper loshen hara. What's the connection between the me'il and loshen hara? And that's what we said, because on the me'il there were these pomegranates with the zagim, the bells. The ringing of the bells, the echaper al kol hara, the evil speech. I'm sure there are deeper meanings here. The tzitz mechaper al azus ponim, right? The tzitz that's worn on the forehead, that's called azus ponim. Azus ponim is someone who's bold and brazen, and he's never embarrassed. He's never ashamed of anything. And how do we know this? Because b'tzitz ksiv v'hoya al metzach Aaron. Metzach, which is the forehead, where the tzitz is worn, and azus ponim ksivu metzach isha zona hoyala, right? On the forehead of a harlot, she refuses to be ashamed. Is it really possible that you could have a kapara for bloodshed or for lashon hara, based on the fact that the Kohenim wore big day kahuna, and the ketones is mechaper on shvichas domim, and the me'il is mechaper on lashon hara? Ha'omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, shnei dvarim lo matzinu lahem kapara b'karbanos. No carbon could be mechaper for ritzicha, for murder, or for lashon hara, because the Torah specifies that the kapara process for murder is through egla arufa, and the kapara process for lashon hara is the ketores. We'll see why the ketores is mechaper on lashon hara in just a second. And he says the following: Matzinu lo kapar makom acher. Eluhen shvichas damim v'loshen hara shvichas dam egla rufa loshen hara miktores the Tani Rabbi Chananya minayin liktores shemechaperes. Why is the ktores mechaperes for loshen hara? Shenemar, because the pasuk says vayitein es haktores vayichaper al ha'am, that the ktores has the power of providing atonement for the people. V'tani debei Rabbi Shmuel al ma ktores mechaperes al loshen hara. Why? Because Yavo Dovish B'chashoy, because the Ketoris is done Lifnai V'Lifnim in the Kodesh. No eye will see the Ketoris. And Yichapel Maisech Hashoy, and that should be Mechaper on Lashon Hara, which is spoken privately. So you see that the Mechaper for Lashon Hara is the Ketoris, not the pomegranates and the bells of the Me'il of the Kohen Gadol. And you see that the Mechaper for murder is the Egla Rufa and not the Ketones. So Kasha Shvichas Dom, Kasha Lashon Hara, Lo Kasha. We can reconcile this. Why? Ha dia man katle. If we can identify the murderer, then the ketones of the coin will be mechaper for that murderer. What does it mean for that murderer? For the community that what word should I use? That hosted, for lack of a better term, the murderer. And Hodlo Yedia Man Katle, but in the case where you find a slain body between two cities, you don't know who the murderer is, then the communal sin is atoned for by the Egla Rufa. He says the ritual of the decapitated calf is performed and atones on behalf of the community if the murderer is unknown. Now, by the way, the fact that the Brisa of Rabbi Chananya states that the Ketores is Mechaper for Lashon Hara is based on a pasuk by Korach, because after the terrible story of the crushing of Korach's rebellion, the entire assembly of Israel complained to Moshe and Aaron that they were responsible for causing Korach and his followers to die. In reaction to this sin of Lashon Hara, God sent a deathly plague upon the nation, which killed 14,700 people. Moshe instructed Aaron to burn the Ketores to check the plague, stop the plague. Aaron promptly did so. The plague was halted. We learn from this incident that the burning of the Ketores atones for the sin of Lashon Hara. Gemara asks the following question: I diyade man katle. Why does the community need a kapara if we can identify the murderer? Barktolahu will put him to death, and by putting him to death, we atone for the sin, even as far as the community is concerned. The Gemara answers, "B'mezid v'lo asrube." We're talking about a case where the murder was deliberate, but there was no asra. And if there was no asra, then there's no execution. If there's no execution, right, there's no implementation of the capital punishment, then the community needs atonement. And how do they atone it? Through the ketones. Lashon hara, nami lo kasha b'tzina b'farhesia. If the lashon hara was spoken in private, then you need the ketones, which is brought in private, to be mechaper. But farhesia, if there's a public lashon hara, then you need the me'il to be mechaper. Now, the question here is, in the case of the aftermath of the episode of the death of Korach Vadaso, when the people of Israel spoke Lashon Hara against Moshe Aaron, and the atonement was the Ketores, that was a Lashon Hara that was public in nature. And yet we're saying that the Ketores is Machaper for Lashon Hara in private. So the Sfas Emes suggests that the slanderers merely insinuated that Moshe and Aaron were responsible for the death of Korach and his followers, but did not make that claim overtly. Since their slander was that of an innuendo, but not overt, therefore it's considered Lashon Hara b'tzina in private. And therefore it's subject to the kapara through the burning of the Ketores in private. Hadron Alecha Hamizbeach Makadish. I can't really say that in a sincere way because I didn't learn the Perek. I was busy running around New York and other places. Okay, wishing you a great day. And in Mirza Hashem, should we shoot for 9:30 tomorrow? Do you want to try that?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, I just had to make sure. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
I'm so
What's best for you, let me know.
yeah. But right now, if you don't hear from me, I'll see you tomorrow at 9:30. Mitzvah Hashem. We'll start a new parak.
All
Okay.
right.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.